Come on, Socks. Can I have my chair back? Oh, sleepy cat. Oh, look, can you see there? Nope. He's not going to play. Oh, he was up all night, having fights outside and waking me up to be fed. And the cat flap clatters at about 3:30, and it sounds like the saloon doors of the pub on the OK Corral, and he comes charging in, shouting at the top of his voice for cat food. And then when he's had it, he goes back outside, and you hear him scrapping or warning off other cats. That's right, you. Hello, everyone. I'm back again on another one of my days off reading. I'm on the fourth of my puffins in a row. I finished You Remember Me last night. This is a stunning book, the sequel to Grinny. And for some reason, I thought it would be just a repeat of everything he did in Grinny. But it's not. It expands on that world, expands on this terrible invasion, this world of celebrity culture and demagogues and fascist dictators who work through celebrity and things that are all too familiar. A brilliant writer. And when I looked up what he'd done, he wrote far more than I knew about. I thought there was maybe 6 or 7 novels, but there's more. He kept going longer than I thought. And it's interesting to see that he didn't have the kind of prominence later on through the 90s, when perhaps his hard-edged, satirical, political science fiction maybe wouldn't have found favour because we were too caught up in a world of consolatory nonsense in children's books in the kind of Harry Potter years when it went a bit softer edged. At least that's how I kind of come to see it now. I've moved on to Paul Jennings, who I've never read, somebody I missed out on in the 80s and 90s, who writes these wonderful, splattery, shocking, mostly ghostly stories for kids, really for boys. That's what they read like. There's one stunning one about a busker and his dog, and he maltreats his dog and puts him down a well. And then he becomes a millionaire and gives away his money, and the dog ends up saving him. It's a tragic story. It's a kind of fable. That's what he's writing, under the guise of slightly throwaway horror stories for kids, kind of goosebumpy stories with a touch of video nasty about them. They're really fables. They're morality stories, old-fashioned stories. And really enjoyable. Yesterday, I was cleaning some books, going through these piles of paperbacks from the To Be Read mountain, and I thought I'd show you some of the books that are kind of waiting. This pile of mass market paperbacks, mostly kids' books, are pulp novels. Often they're parts of series or parts of collections by particular authors. And I have the next one ready for when I'm ready to read that person again, if you see what I mean. It's a kind of standby supply of favourite fiction. So I got myself a new Paul Zindel earlier this year. Pardon me, you're stepping on my eyeball. After reading The Pigman in January, which I thought was an amazing book. This has followed me around for years and years. The novelisation of The Black Hole from, I guess, 1980. I've read it before and I've intended to return to it. There's a bookmark and it's a Waterstones reading. Meet David Sedaris, 16th of September at 7 p.m. Ticket, £3. Now, that's interesting. I thought they were always free. I was complaining about their readings being £5 suddenly in the shop. This is like 2008, I think. I think it was probably redeemable against the book, although I would have bought the book already. I still think it's an outrage that they charge to see people read in a bookshop. In the old days, in the early 90s, I would go to this particular shop, Deansgate Waterstones, in the middle of Manchester, and I'd go almost weekly when I lived in Lancaster, miles away, and we'd go and see whoever was reading for free. You'd have to book ahead, and they put on a buffet, and they did a good reading, and there was a big long queue buying the new hardback by Margaret Atwood, Isabel Allende, Jeff Ryman, Armistead Maupin. Loads and loads of people I saw week after week, and it was brilliant. We always bought the book, even though I had no money. Did we always buy the book? Maybe not. I think I'd take my old books. I keep finding things like copies of Margaret Atwood, for example, like this, just reaching past you. Lady Oracle, this Virago classic, which I clearly bought secondhand. Yeah. Lancaster Student Union Bookshop, 23rd of June 1993. I bought it for for £2, and then got her to sign it. But, it's still her book. It's still a nice copy. As I've always said, I love these Virago modern classics of that time. They did them so nicely, and they chose good pictures for the covers, good paintings. Anyway, the black hole. And on the back of this ticket, I can't read my own writing. Wow. Vincent in the black hole, page 42. Indeed, he mused, I am the same stuff, differently formed and imbued with intelligence. I am cousin both to meteor and man. What a quote. Z for Zachariah, which I've never read, the post-nuclear apocalypse novel by Robert C. O'Brien, who wrote Mrs. Frisbee and The Rats of Nim. And again, one I feel like I've read. I think I saw the TV version. I've never actually sat down with. That feels like another summer day's read. And Nicholas Fisk's short stories have suddenly become more valuable to me now that I know that I think there's only one collection, and this is from his kind of heyday, I believe, the early 80s. I might have to write something about him. I don't know. I remember seeing a clip of him talking on an episode, one of the few surviving episodes on YouTube of The Book Tower, which is one of the best TV shows there ever was. If you get a chance to see any of it, it had various presenters, and they all did the same thing. They lived in this stately home, and they talked about books that were coming out that week for kids. And there'd be little bits of dramatization. There'd be talks by the writer. And I remember Robert Fisk sitting on the roof, I think, of the Book Tower and talking about whichever book it was he had out at that point. It might have been On the Flip Side. And he seemed quite kind of professorial or teacherly. But anyway, it was the best TV show. The original series, first couple of years, were introduced by Tom Baker, who poured tea and sat at a wickerwork table in a big chair and just chatted, and then did ridiculous things, as he would, in this room that was where everything was painted white, and there was a spiral staircase, and it was all inside this tower. Very Doctor Who-ish. And I got the chance many, many years later to say how valued that show was, and he was delighted. Another Paul Zindel, The Pigman and Me, which I believe is the story behind the book. It's his memoirs of the time and place. This is the third in this series, the Han Solo series. by A.C. Crispin. When I feel ready to read another Star Wars book, to go back to this world, this will be the one I read. I've read the first two several years ago, and I know various people who swear by this trilogy, and they're right. It's got more Star Wars in it than almost anything I've seen Disney do. It has that kind of essence of remembered Star Wars, what it felt like in the late 70s, which is more than the sum of its parts, really. It's indefinable what that means, but it's somehow centered around this the character of Han Solo, a character who could come from any time, any place, but he's a genre type, isn't he? He's a rogue with a heart of gold. That's what he is. And so this could be a 1930s story in Casablanca or somewhere, but it's not. It's in a galaxy far, far away. So I've been keeping this last one. Stupid, really. The last bit of this trilogy. I hope I can remember what went on in the previous ones. I remember that when I watched the Disney prequel movie about Han Solo, it felt like they'd taken bits of her books, I think uncredited. It didn't come anywhere near in terms of quality, although it was still an enjoyable movie. I just wish they'd buy the rights to people's books and film them. Why these people who write TV and film think they can just read the back of something or take the ideas and just write something off the top of their heads because they're more skilled or whatever, I don't know. I don't know why they just don't adapt things. Because often they don't. They mix and match. Another third part of the trilogy, Domain, the third Rats book. This is the one where I think I've mentioned this before. I wanted to read the last part and picked up the first few chapters of this and thought they were amazing, all this apocalyptic stuff, but it was during lockdown and COVID, and so I just popped it away again thinking, I can't quite cope with this now. Maybe I'm ready to return to the Rats. I think James Herbert was a wonderful writer, I really do. I haven't read all of them, but I'm making my way very slowly through his books. I want to go back and reread The Magic Cottage, which is a book I loved when I was about 15, which was the book that was out that particular year. And I've still got my copy from then. Okay, Clash of the Titans. I just bought a Blu-ray of this. I've got this hankering to watch Ray Harryhausen on Blu-ray, because I imagine his stop motion animation will look fantastic on a decent recording, a decent disc, and also hankering for these kind of Greek myths stories. In the back of my head, I'm building something, some kind of outline, a story I want to write. So this is a good thing to go back to, and I love this film. And I read this when I was about 11 when it came out. There's pictures of me sat in the garden, tiny garden in Sampson Place in Aycliffe, reading this. Yes, and I went on my Batman buying binge, looking at what novels I didn't have based on Batman stuff. And this is one Penguin did in the 90s, following on from the Tim Burton movies. Craig Shaw Gardner, who adapted some of those movies to novels, the Batman Murders. It's all building up to a novel coming out in the autumn by John Jackson Miller, who's an Italian writer. His work I've really enjoyed. I loved his book Kenobi, based on the Star Wars stuff. And again, a better take on a prequel story for Kenobi than the Disney terrible miniseries. I thought it was an awful miniseries. I really did. The only way that miniseries could have worked, the Kenobi one, would be if the infant Princess Leia character in it had been a little monster who refused to do anything, who kicked up her feet in temper all the way through, and was a kind of Violet Elizabeth, like in Just William. But she wasn't. She was like a perfect princess, and it was soppy and sentimental, like so many things are these days. There was a way of making that into a decent story. Anyway, John Jackson Miller wrote a wonderful book about Kenobi on Tatooine. I love stuff about Tatooine, and the Tusken Raiders and all of that stuff. So he's done a Batman novel, which fits between the two Tim Burton movies, and that comes out apparently in the autumn, and I've got it on pre-order. I'm going to give myself a book buying ban and just read what's in the house. That's my idea. But I have got a whole load of books on pre-order, whether it's this new Batman book or the new Banana Yoshimoto novel, an Ann Tyler novel, which comes out in the spring, apparently. Bless her, she's still going, and I'm so glad I pre-ordered that. There's a whole bunch of things I've got pre-ordered. Science fiction novels that have kind of accumulated on my shelves. This is H. Beam Piper, Little Fuzzy, which I can't even remember getting. It sounds like a kind of ecological disaster space opera. And for some reason, it kind of reminded me of E.T. and the Book of the Green Planet, that kind of slightly hippie-ish science fiction, which I always enjoy. Clifford D. Simak, The Werewolf Principle, with a fab cover. This is from Bobcat Books down the street, where they suddenly got this massive collection of pulp science fiction a little while ago, and I ran down the street to buy a heap of it. Simak always interests me because years ago when I was a kid, I read Shakespeare's Planet out of Aycliffe Library, and it was the weirdest book I've ever read, I think. I bought a new copy of it in recent years to find out if it was as strange as I remember. The novelisation of Time Bandits, which we all read at the time and passed around between us because it was the best film there'd ever been at that point. I've been thinking about it again because of the new TV show, which I've not seen yet. It's on a channel we don't get. And whether I'm pleased about that happening or not, I'm not sure. I wish there'd been sequels to the film with the original cast. Maybe it's brilliant because there's only one of them. Maybe it's fantastic because it's finite. And we haven't had prequels, and we haven't had sequels, and we haven't had spin-offs. And the rest of it, it's just one film that's the perfect synthesis of elements of Graham Williams' late 70s Doctor Who and the Python movies, which I think is what it is, really. Yeah. With a touch of Hitchhikers, maybe. Robert Leeson's Third Class Genie, another kids' book from the 80s, which I didn't read at the time, I've become aware of. I realise it's set round here and is somebody, a brilliant writer, whose other work I know, taking fairy tale fantasy tropes and basing them in very recognisable landscapes, urban landscapes, comically. People like Alan Garner do that and set them round here, but with no discernible sense of humour whatsoever. I know people revere Alan Garner. I enjoy his stuff, but I find it slightly ponderous, I suppose. Maybe I'm just frivolous. I've been told that I like things that are flippant. And it reminds me of being told by my dreaded third-year teacher in junior school that life, Paul, is not a comic strip. It's what she wrote on one of my stories, and she always felt that about my stories, even though I would type mine out and give her a manuscript. I think she hated me for being too keen on work, keen on writing, and she had to bring me down. And my report for English that year, when I was 9 or 10, was Paul has to learn that life is not a comic strip, and his stories are too frivolous. I was gutted. I still remember being gutted. More Batman. This is a lovely big collection of Joker stories that came out in the early 90s again. No, 1990. I remember reading the first one, The Further Adventures of Batman, the very year that Tim Burton's Batman came out, on our last family holiday in Carlisle. There was a caravan park in Carlisle, and we saw the movie, and I had that particular collection of stories, and I didn't get this one the next year. And so it was many years later that I got hold of this. I've only read a couple of them. I really like Batman stuff in prose. I think it's, again, the idea that it could be set in any time. You could take those stories and set them in the Wild West or the future. There's something timeless about the dynamics between the characters. And I'm up to this stage in Anne of Green Gables, the third book. I've bought them all secondhand at different points. And this is a Puffin Classics one. I really like this series. I've read the first two a number of times, but that's as far as I've got through the series. It just reminds me of watching the dramatizations with my mum on TV when I was a kid. It's very nostalgic. And then my 3 Jonathan Carrolls, which I've got waiting to go through in order. I don't think I read this one at the time, Bones of the Moon. I did read Sleeping in a Flame, and I did read Child Across the Sky. But, as I said, they all came from the library, and I gave them back and never got them again, and forgot everything about them. And all I remembered was how much I loved The Land of Laughs, his first book. And I revisited him over the years, but only his most recent one each time. So I haven't had a sense of his developing career, because I feel the stories are kind of spiritual successors to each other. They pay into a world he's building very gradually, very strangely. Anyway, that for some reason is a whole pile of things I felt driven to talk about today. This is the one I'm going to get to next, though. I keep talking about this Star Trek book. It's the next on my Star Trek pile. When I was going through those cabinets of paperbacks, pulp paperbacks, I realised just how many Star Trek books I have. It's like an obsession somehow. I saw the stuff about San Diego Comic-Con and this team-up that didn't really happen, Star Trek and Doctor Who. It was a panel. There's going to be a computer game, not something I care about. And what you got was a mash-up clip sequence, which was quite nice. And there have been Doctor Who and Star Trek mashups before. There was a graphic novel, which I'm looking for along the shelf. It's there somewhere. I do know it's there. Called Assimilation, which was quite nice. There should be a novel, and I'm the only person who should write it. Anyway, I want to go back to reading now. I'm going to say goodbye, and I've gone over time. So I will see you again soon in the next episode. Say goodbye, Socks. No, he's fast asleep on my lap. Bye-bye.